Abstract. Lady Beatrice Vance, bound by an ancient treaty to the enigmatic and formidable Archmage Adrian Blackwood, expects a life of cold duty and separation. However, beneath the surface of their arranged marriage lies a dormant magic within her and a hidden warmth within him. As political unrest boils over into the Twilight Rebellion and ghosts from the past resurface, Beatrice must navigate a path between her duty, her growing feelings for her husband, and a destiny she never asked for. The air inside the Cathedral of St. Ethel tasted of stale incense and centuries of unspoken regrets. Lady Beatrice Vance stood before the altar, the cold stone seeping through the thin soles of her silk slippers, grounding her in a reality she desperately wished to escape. Sunlight filtered through the stained-glass depictions of martyrs, casting fragmented pools of crimson and azure upon the white lace of her gown, a gown that felt less like a celebration and more like a shroud. She was known throughout the county for her stubbornness, a trait inherited from her father, General Vance, but today, that legendary resolve felt brittle. Her life, once a predictable tapestry of tea parties and horse riding, had careened off a cliff due to a dusty, crumbling piece of parchment found in the royal archives, a centennial treaty that obligated a daughter of House Vance to wed the master of the Blackwood lineage. And standing beside her was the master in question, Archmage Adrian Blackwood. He was a man composed of sharp angles and silence. His reputation preceded him like a winter storm. They called him the Ice Block of the North, a sorcerer so consumed by his arcane studies that he had forgotten how to be human. He stood tall, encased in formal black robes embroidered with silver threads that seemed to shift and writhe of their own accord. He had not looked at her once since she arrived, his gaze fixed on the altar with the intensity of a scholar deciphering a particularly difficult rune. Beatrice swallowed hard, her throat dry. Her mind drifted back to 3 nights ago, to the desperate, hushed argument in the moonlit gardens of her father's estate. Caleb, her friend since childhood and a self-taught necromancer with a penchant for melodrama, had gripped her hands, his eyes wild. "Run with me, Bea," he had pleaded, the scent of earth and graveyard soil clinging to his cloak. "We can go west, to the free cities. Forget the treaty. Forget Blackwood. I can protect you." The temptation had been a physical ache in her chest. To ride into the sunset, to embrace the chaotic freedom Caleb offered, it was the dream of a girl who read too many adventure novels. But then she had thought of her father's tired eyes, of the honor of her house, and the threat of the crown seizing their lands if the treaty was breached. Duty, heavy and suffocating, had tipped the scales. She had pulled her hands away, leaving Caleb standing in the shadows, and walked back toward her cage. "Do you, Adrian Blackwood, take this woman to be your lawfully wedded wife and magical anchor?" the high priest intoned, his voice echoing in the vast, empty nave. The silence that followed was heavy enough to crush bone. Beatrice dared to glance up. Adrian turned his head slowly. His eyes were the color of storm clouds, dark and unreadable. He looked at her not with affection, nor even lust, but with a clinical curiosity, as if she were a complex spell construct he was trying to dismantle with his mind. "I do," Adrian said. His voice was a deep baritone, smooth and resonant, devoid of hesitation. As he spoke, he reached out and took her hand. His skin was cool, but as his fingers closed around hers, a shock wave of energy, pure, vibrating power, shot up her arm, settling around her heart like a golden chain. The magical bond. It was done. "And, do you, Beatrice?" She recited her lines, the words tasting like ash. When the ceremony concluded, there was no cheering crowd. The pews were mostly empty, save for a few grim-faced relatives and court officials. As they turned to leave the altar, a figure emerged from the shadows of the colonnade. It was Mentor Simon, a man whose gray robes seemed to merge with the stone pillars. He was a priest of the Cult of Shadows, an ancient order that most people crossed the street to avoid. Beatrice, however, knew him as the old man who sat by the river, whom she had secretly fed meat pies and jam tarts during her morning walks. A union of light and void, Simon rasped, stepping into their path. His milky eyes fixed on Beatrice. The shadows watch you, child. They see the storm before it breaks. He raised a gnarled hand, tracing a symbol in the air that lingered like faint smoke. May your shadows always walk behind you, never over you. It was a blessing, she supposed, though it sent a shiver down her spine. Adrian stiffened beside her, his grip on her hand tightening imperceptibly, but he nodded to the priest, a mark of respect that surprised her. Instead of a carriage bound for a royal palace or a luxury villa, the vehicle waiting for them was a heavy, iron-reinforced coach drawn by 4 black stallions that breathed mist into the warm afternoon air. "Where are we going?" Beatrice asked as she climbed inside, gathering her skirts. "Windy Peak," Adrian replied curtly, sitting opposite her. Beatrice blinked. "My family's old estate? But it's been uninhabited for a decade. The roof leaks. The mice have formed a constitutional monarchy. It is neutral ground," Adrian said, pulling a book from the inner pocket of his robe. "And it sits on a ley line I wish to observe." The journey was long and excruciatingly quiet. The landscape rolled by, transitioning from the manicured lawns of the capital to the rugged, windswept hills of her childhood. Beatrice watched Adrian read. He didn't fidget. He didn't sigh. He simply existed, perfectly still. Finally, her patience snapped. If she was to be trapped in this marriage, she would set the terms. "We need to establish ground rules," she announced, smoothing her gloves. Adrian didn't look up. "Proceed." "First, this is a marriage of convenience. A fiction. We are allies, perhaps partners in a legal sense, but nothing more." He turned a page. "Second," she continued, her voice rising slightly, "we will have separate bedrooms. I value my privacy." "Third," she rushed on, "I expect no emotional demands.
No fake metafiction.
We live as neighbors. Respectful, distant neighbors." Adrian finally lowered the book. He looked at her, one dark eyebrow arching upward. The expression transformed his face, cracking the marble mask just enough to reveal a hint of dry amusement. "Neighbors," he repeated, testing the word. "Lady Beatrice, we are bound by a blood magic treaty that ties our life forces together. If I am injured, you will feel a chill. If you are in danger, I will know it instantly. We cannot be neighbors." He leaned forward slightly. "And as for the bedrooms, the estate is drafty. We shall see. I am serious, Lord Blackwood. And I am Adrian. If you call me Lord Blackwood again, I shall turn your tea into vinegar." They arrived at Windy Peak at dusk. The manor was exactly as she remembered, a Gothic sprawl of grey stone clinging to the edge of a cliff, looking as though a strong sneeze might send it tumbling into the valley below. The wind howled through the eaves, a mournful welcome. Inside, the servants, a skeleton crew sent ahead by her father, scuttled about nervously. Even the mice, Beatrice noted, seemed to tiptoe across the floorboards out of polite deference to the Archmage. A modest banquet had been arranged in the great hall, where the tapestries were threadbare and the chandelier missed a third of its crystals. Among the few local gentry invited to witness the consummation of the union was Baron von News. The Baron was a man who resembled a toad that had been magically transformed into a human but retained all the slimy characteristics of his former life. He held a goblet of wine with a greasy hand, his eyes darting over Beatrice's form. "Well, well," von News sneered, stepping closer to the head table. "The spitfire of the Vances finally tamed? I must say, Archmage, you have taken on quite the burden. They say her dowry was doubled just to get someone to take her off the general's hands." The room went quiet. Beatrice felt the heat rise in her cheeks. Not from shame, but from a sudden, white-hot fury. She set her fork down with a deliberate clink. "Baron," she said, her voice dripping with sugary poison. "How delightful to see you. I was worried the swamp drainage efforts might have left you homeless. And regarding my dowry, it was indeed substantial. It had to be, to compensate for the tragic loss of my presence in society, where I frequently had to explain simple concepts to men who mistake their titles for intelligence." A stifled gasp ran through the room. Von News turned a mottled shade of purple. He opened his mouth to retort, but a low, dangerous chuckle cut him off. Adrian slowly rose from his chair. He didn't look at the Baron. He looked at Beatrice, and for the first time, the corner of his mouth quirked upward in a genuine, barely perceptible smile. "My wife," Adrian said, his voice carrying to every corner of the hall, "has a tongue sharper than any blade in my armory. I suggest, Baron, that you do not test its edge again, lest you find yourself verbally eviscerated." He turned his cold gaze to Von News. "And if she misses, I will not." The Baron paled and hurriedly excused himself. Beatrice looked at Adrian, stunned. He sat back down and calmly refilled her wine glass. "Eat your pheasant, Beatrice. It's getting cold." The rest of the evening passed in a blur, leading inevitably to the moment Beatrice had dreaded most, the bridal chamber. The room chosen for them was the master suite, the only room with a functional fireplace. The fire roared in the hearth, casting flickering shadows against the heavy velvet curtains. Beatrice stood by the window, her heart hammering against her ribs like a trapped bird. Hidden within the folds of her nightgown was a silver letter opener, a stiletto she had swiped from the library downstairs. It was a foolish, panic-driven weapon, but it made her feel slightly less helpless. The door clicked shut. Adrian entered. He had discarded his heavy outer robes, wearing only a loose white shirt and breeches. He looked less like a monument and more like a man, which made him infinitely more dangerous. He walked toward the bed, turning down the covers. "You can stop vibrating, Beatrice. I can hear your teeth chattering from here." "I am not chattering," she snapped, spinning around. As he took a step toward her, panic seized her. She whipped the stiletto out, holding it with trembling hands between them. "Stay back. I meant what I said about boundaries." Adrian stopped. He looked at the letter opener, then at her face. He didn't flinch. In one fluid motion, almost too fast for her to track, he stepped inside her guard. His hand caught her wrist, not painfully, but with absolute firmness. He applied the slightest pressure to a nerve, and her fingers went numb. The stiletto clattered to the floor. He kicked it away, never breaking eye contact. "I have faced dragons, demon lords, and committee meetings," Adrian said softly, his face inches from hers. "A letter opener is hardly necessary." He released her wrist and stepped back, holding his hands up in a gesture of surrender. "Listen to me," he said, his voice dropping to a solemn vow. "I am not a monster, and I do not take what is not freely given. There will be no touching.
No demands.
Nothing, until you ask for it yourself. You have my word as a Blackwood." Beatrice stared at him, searching for the lie. She found none. The tension left her legs, and she slumped slightly. "Until I ask?" Which, he added dryly, walking to the other side of the massive bed, "might be a long wait, judging by the glare you're giving me. Take the left side. I steal the covers." Sleep was elusive, but when morning came, it brought chaos. Beatrice woke to sunlight streaming across her face and a strange sensation in her fingertips. She stretched, and as she yawned, the heavy velvet curtains across the room suddenly burst open, as if yanked by invisible hands. The wash-basin pitcher levitated 3 feet into the air, spun pirouettes, and shattered against the wall.
Beatrice shrieked, sitting bolt upright.
Adrian was awake instantly. He didn't reach for a weapon. He reached for her, his hand glowing with a protective rune. He scanned the room, then looked at the shattered pottery, then at Beatrice's terrified face. He lowered his hand, his eyes narrowing. "Did you do that?" he asked. I don't know. I just stretched." Adrian walked over to the debris. He waved a hand over the shards, and they trembled, glowing with a faint residue of energy, her energy. He turned back to her, looking not angry, but profoundly surprised. "Raw magical potential," he muttered. "Immense. And completely untrained. How have you suppressed this for 20 years? "I didn't know," Beatrice cried. "I thought I was just clumsy with China." "This changes everything," Adrian said, his tone shifting from husband to Archmage. "Windy Peak is not secure enough. Uncontrolled magic acts like a beacon to entities you do not want to meet. We are leaving. Leaving? To where? To my citadel. Castle Blackcliff. Pack your bags, Beatrice. We leave within the hour. The journey to Blackcliff was teleportation-assisted, a sensation Beatrice likened to being squeezed through a straw. When the world stopped spinning, she found herself standing in a courtyard of obsidian stone, surrounded by towering spires that pierced the clouds. The air smelled of ozone and ancient stone. If Windy Peak was a decaying memory, Blackcliff was a fortress of power. But inside, it was surprisingly chaotic. Uncle Adrian. Two small blurs, one blonde, one brunette, slammed into Adrian's legs. Beatrice watched, jaw dropped, as the terrifying Archmage stumbled, laughed, and patted the heads of the children. "Tim, Hannah," Adrian said, peeling them off. "Where are your manners?" A man who looked like a sunnier, softer version of Adrian approached, grinning. This was Felix, Adrian's younger brother, and the crown's treasure. Beside him was Mira, his wife, a woman with a smile so warm it could melt snow. "You must be Beatrice," Mira exclaimed, bypassing the handshake and pulling Beatrice into a hug. "Oh, thank goodness. We were terrified he'd marry a grimoire." Beatrice found herself smiling back. "It was a close call, I think." The warmth of the welcome, however, was short-lived. A woman descended the grand staircase, her movement as fluid as pouring water. She was stunning, with hair like spun gold and eyes like frozen sapphires. "Countess Isolde." "So this is the little treaty bride," Isolde said, stopping on the last step. Her gaze raked over Beatrice, finding every flaw in her travel-weary appearance. Isolde had been Adrian's lover years ago, a fact the court gossips never let die. Quaint. I suppose the Vances were desperate to offload her. "Isolde," Adrian warned, his voice dropping to the temperature of the castle walls. "I am merely welcoming the new mistress of the house," Isolde said with a shark-like smile. "Do try not to break anything, dear. This isn't a farmhouse." Beatrice straightened her spine. "Thank you, Countess.
I'll try not to.
Though I've heard antique things are often fragile, I shall be careful around you." Felix coughed to hide a laugh. Adrian didn't smile, but his eyes glittered with approval. Life at Blackcliff settled into a strange rhythm. During the days, Adrian was often sequestered in his tower, dealing with matters of state. Rumors were swirling, dark whispers that the Cult of Shadows had begun using forbidden mind control magic, the Chains of Will, to infiltrate high society. Dinner conversations grew tense. Adrian looked more tired each evening, the lines around his eyes deepening. "The king is blind to it," Adrian muttered one night, pushing his plate away. "He thinks the shadows are just religious fanatics. But I feel the disturbance in the ley lines. They are building an army, not a congregation." Beatrice wanted to comfort him, to smooth the furrow between his brows, but the no-touching rule stood like a wall between them. Feeling suffocated by the looming political storm, Beatrice fled to the stables the next afternoon. She loved the smell of hay and horses. It reminded her of simpler times. She was brushing her mare when a groan from the hayloft froze her blood. She grabbed a pitchfork. "Who's there?"
"Vi."
"Is that you?" The voice was weak.
"Familiar."
Beatrice dropped the pitchfork and scrambled up the ladder. There, huddled in the shadows, bleeding from a nasty gash in his side, was Caleb. "Caleb!" She fell to her knees beside him. "What are you doing here? This is the Blackwood stronghold. If Adrian finds you—" "I had to see you," Caleb wheezed, clutching his side. "I was hunting in the woods, crossed the boundary, patrol saw me." "B, you have to come with me." "He's a monster. He'll destroy you." "He is my husband, and he has been nothing but decent," Beatrice hissed, tearing a strip from her petticoat to bind his wound. "You idiot. You're bleeding out." She pressed her hands to the wound. Panic surged through her, and with it, that strange heat she had felt the morning after the wedding. Instinct took over. She didn't know the spell, but she willed the flesh to knit. Golden light spilled from her fingers. Caleb gasped as the skin sealed over, leaving only a faint scar. "You have magic," Caleb whispered, staring at her with wide eyes. You are one of the gifted." Sure. The heavy oak doors of the stable creaked open. Footsteps, heavy, deliberate, crunched on the straw below. "Beatrice?" Adrian's voice. I sensed a flare of magic. "Are you hurt?" "I'm fine," she called out, her heart slamming against her ribs. She shoved Caleb back into the hay. "Just practicing. Don't come up, I'm not decent." Adrian paused. "Very well. Dinner is in an hour. Do not tax yourself." The footsteps retreated. Beatrice slumped against a bale of hay, exhaling a breath she didn't know she was holding. Caleb grabbed her hand. "He suspects," Caleb said urgently. He moved to the loft window. "I have to go. But this isn't over, B. You have power now. You don't need him. You'll be mine one way or another." He slipped out the window into the night, leaving Beatrice with a knot of dread in her stomach. In the weeks that followed, Adrian began a campaign. Not a military one, but a siege of her heart. It was subtle. He insisted they sleep in the same bed to maintain the legend for the servants and spies, but he remained a perfect gentleman. Yet, in the deep of the night, the castle was freezing. Beatrice would wake up to find herself curled against his back, seeking warmth, or find his arm draped protectively over her waist. He was a furnace, a solid anchor in the dark. He started stealing the blanket, true to his word, which led to sleepy, whispered tug-of-war matches at dawn. He left books on magical theory on her nightstand. He defended her choice of dessert against Isolde's sneers. Beatrice realized with a jolt of terror that she was falling for her husband. But peace is fragile. A royal messenger arrived with a seal of crimson wax. King Edward demanded Adrian's presence in the capital immediately regarding the shadow reports. "I cannot take you," Adrian said, pacing their chamber while packing a satchel with potions. "The capital is a viper's nest right now. You will return to Windy Peak. It is isolated, boring, and safe. I can fight. I have magic. You have uncontrolled bursts of light that are more likely to blind me than the enemy."
No, Beatrice.
"Please." He stopped and cupped her face in his hands, the first voluntary touch since the wedding. His thumbs brushed her cheekbones. "Be safe. For me." He left before she could answer, and she was carted off to Windy Peak like a piece of luggage. 2 weeks at Windy Peak were enough to drive her mad. The silence was deafening. She practiced the exercises from the books Adrian had left, gaining some control over her sparks. But staring at the rain was not enough. She needed to know what she was capable of. "I am going to Glimmerhall," she announced to her reflection. The Academy of Sorcery in Glimmerhall was holding its annual open examinations. Donning a frizzy red wig, oversized spectacles, and a robe that looked like it had been sewn from a potato sack, Beatrice Vance became Matilda Poof. She sneaked into the city, blended with the nervous students, and signed up for the intermediate aptitude test. She wanted to prove to herself, and to Adrian, that she was an asset, not a liability. She breezed through the written portion. Then came the practical. She stood in the center of the amphitheater, the judges hidden behind a blinding magical barrier. Candidate Poof, a magically amplified voice boomed. "Demonstrate a defensive ward." Beatrice took a deep breath. She didn't want a standard shield. She visualized the way Adrian's presence felt, solid, unyielding, protective. She threw her hands up and cast. A dome of shimmering golden hexagonal plates erupted around her, expanding with such force that it cracked the floor stones. The audience gasped. It was a master-level construct, imperfect but raw with power. The magical barrier, hiding the judges, dissolved. "Impressive," said the chairman. Beatrice froze. She knew that voice. Sitting in the center chair, looking exhausted but terrifyingly sharp, was Adrian. He stared at Matilda Poof. He looked at the red wig. He looked at the familiar way she stood, the specific tilt of her chin. He rested his chin on his hand. "Tell me, Miss Poof," Adrian said, his voice silky, "does your husband know you are out playing with high-yield sorcery?" The amphitheater went silent. Beatrice straightened, realizing the jig was up. She pulled off the itchy wig. "He does now, Archmage." The students murmured wildly. "Lady Blackwood? Here?" Adrian stood up. He didn't look angry. He looked impressed and undeniably relieved to see her. He walked down the steps of the podium, closing the distance between them. "You passed," he said quietly, so only she could hear. "Outstanding marks. But there is a penalty for deception and unauthorized travel." "Oh," Beatrice challenged, breathless. "And what is the fine?" Adrian stepped into her personal space, violating the no-touching rule with flagrant disregard as he wrapped an arm around her waist, pulling her flesh against him. "Private tutelage," he murmured, his gaze dropping to her lips. "Under your true name, and the tuition fees will be paid in kisses. A great many of them." Beatrice's heart skipped a beat. "I think I can afford that." He leaned in, his lips brushing hers, a promise of the fire that had been smoldering between them for months. But before the kiss could deepen, the heavy double doors of the exam hall banged open. A royal guardsman, armor stained with soot, stumbled in. "Archmage Blackwood," the man shouted, breathless. "Orders from the king. The temples of the shadow cult, he ordered them burned. All of them, within the hour." Adrian pulled back, his face hardening into stone. "The fool," he hissed. "He hasn't purged them. He's kicked the hornet's nest." Through the high windows of the academy, Beatrice saw the horizon towards the capital begin to glow with an ominous, flickering orange light. The Twilight Mutiny had begun. The horizon burned. It wasn't the soft glow of sunset, but the angry, jagged orange of a city set alight. The king's decree to burn the temples had been the spark in a powder keg that had been drying for decades. The Twilight Mutiny wasn't just a riot, it was a revolution. "Beatrice, listen to me," Adrian said, gripping her shoulders in the academy hallway. His voice was steady, but his eyes betrayed a terrifying fear. "You must go back to Windy Peak. The capital is about to become a slaughterhouse." "I can't," Beatrice cried, pulling away. "Mentor Simon is at the orphanage in Stonebridge. It's right next to the Great Temple. If the king's men torch the temple, the orphanage goes with it. I will send a squad." "You don't have a squad, Adrian. They're all deploying to the palace." Beatrice didn't wait for permission. She closed her eyes, visualizing the cobbled streets of Stonebridge, the smell of the bakery next to the temple, the specific texture of the orphanage's wooden door.
"Beatrice, no."
"That portal is unstable." She didn't listen. She threw her hands out, ripping a hole in reality. The air screamed as she stepped through, the vacuum of the portal swallowing Adrian's shout of her name. She tumbled out onto the cobblestones of Stonebridge, coughing as smoke filled her lungs. The scene was apocalyptic. Royal soldiers, their tabards stained with soot, were clashing with robed cultists in the streets. But the cultists weren't just using shadow magic. They were being led by armed militia, the rebels. Beatrice sprinted toward the orphanage. The roof of the temple next door was already a roaring inferno, sending showers of sparks onto the wooden shingles of the children's shelter. "Get them out," Beatrice screamed, blasting a locked door off its hinges with a pulse of raw force. Inside, Mentor Simon was herding terrified children into the cellar. He looked frail, his gray robe singed. "Lady Blackwood," he rasped, coughing. "You shouldn't be here. The shadows are angry." "I don't care about the shadows. I care about these children." She helped lift the smallest ones, guiding them through the back alley. But as they emerged into the narrow street, their path was blocked. A wall of royal guards advanced from one side, swords drawn, intent on purging anyone associated with the cult. From the other side, a massive group of rebels emerged. Leading the rebels was a giant of a man clad in heavy iron armor, wielding a hammer that looked heavy enough to crush a carriage. This was General Thunder, the face of the mutiny. And standing at his right hand, looking grim and harder than she remembered, was Caleb. "Caleb!" Beatrice breathed. Caleb's eyes widened. "Hold," he shouted to the rebels. General Thunder looked down at Beatrice, then at the trembling children clinging to her skirts. "A noblewoman protecting rats?" he rumbled, his voice like grinding stones. They are children, Beatrice snapped, her fear momentarily eclipsed by outrage. And if you are the liberators you claim to be, you'll let them pass. Thunder laughed, a harsh, barking sound.
She is spirit.
Let them go. Thank you, she whispered. She turned to Caleb. Come with us. Please. Caleb shook his head sadly. I chose my side, B, just like you chose yours. As the rebels engaged the royal guards to cover their escape, Thunder tossed something to Beatrice. It was a heavy iron amulet shaped like a clenched fist. For your bravery, little lady. May it bring you luck in the hell that is coming. Beatrice managed to get Simon and the children to a neutral sanctuary run by the Order of Healers. But as she stepped out to catch her breath, a fresh detachment of royal guards, men who didn't know who she was, surrounded her. Arrest her, the captain shouted. She was seen conspiring with the rebel general. I am Lady Blackwood, she screamed as they shackled her. And I am the Queen of Fairies, the captain spat. Move! The holding cell at the local garrison was damp and smelled of despair. Beatrice sat in the corner, her magical energy drained. Hours passed. Then, the heavy iron door didn't just open, it was torn from its hinges. Adrian stood in the doorway.
He was terrifying.
The air around him crackled with lethal violet lightning. The guards cowered against the walls, their weapons clattering to the floor. You arrested my wife, Adrian said. It wasn't a question. It was a death sentence. Lord Blackwood, the captain stammered, pale as a sheet. We didn't know. Get out, Adrian whispered. Before I turn your bones to glass. The guards fled. Adrian rushed to Beatrice, kneeling in the dirt to unlock her shackles with a wave of his hand. He pulled her into his arms, burying his face in her hair. He was shaking. I thought I lost you, he murmured. I felt your fear through the bond. God, Beatrice, never do that again. I saved them, Adrian. I saved the children. I know. You are brilliant and foolish and brave. He pulled back, his face grim. But I cannot keep you here. The capital is falling. The king has fled to the inner sanctum. I have to go back to defend the prince. I'm coming with you.
No.
You're going to St. Clara's convent in the northern hills. It is holy ground. The rebels won't touch it. I need to know you are safe, so I can fight without distraction. He kissed her hard, a kiss that tasted of goodbyes, and before she could argue, he activated a teleportation scroll he had slapped onto her back. St. Clara's was peaceful, silent, and maddening. For 3 days, Beatrice paced the cloisters. The nuns moved in silent prayer, oblivious to the world ending outside. But Beatrice felt it. The bond with Adrian was a constant, low-level hum in her mind, transmitting waves of exhaustion, pain, and determination. Then, the hum spiked with sharp, jagged agony. And then silence. A muffled, damp silence, like a heavy blanket thrown over a speaker. No, she whispered, dropping her prayer book.
No, no, no.
She ran to the Mother Superior. My husband is in danger. I have to leave. The gates are barred, child. The roads are swarming with rebels. I don't care. Beatrice stole a horse from the convent stables and rode south. She didn't ride as a noblewoman. She rode as a force of nature. When she reached the capital, it was unrecognizable. Smoke choked the sky. The banner of the rebellion hung from the city walls. The streets were a lawless ruin. She had barely made it 2 blocks into the city when a group of looters stepped out from a burnout shop. Leading them was a man with a familiar, greasy sneer.
Baron von Gnus.
He wore a mismatched collection of stolen armor and looked more like a vulture than ever. Well, look what the chaos blew in, News leered, signaling his men to fan out. The Blackwood bride. Without her sorcerer watchdog. Get out of my way, News, Beatrice warned, her hand sparking. I don't think I will. I have a score to settle. And with your husband likely dead in a ditch, who is going to stop me? He lunged. Beatrice raised her hand to blast him, but a small, shadowed figure dropped from the rooftop above, landing squarely on News's shoulders. Run, lady, the figure shouted, stabbing a dagger into the Baron's pauldron before flipping away. It was a boy, no older than 15, dressed in rags. He grabbed Beatrice's hand. This way. Unless you want to be vulture stew. He dragged her through a maze of alleys and finally pried open a sewer grate.
Down.
Quick. They tumbled into the darkness, just as News's men rounded the corner. The sewer smelled horrific, but it was safe. The boy, who introduced himself as Slink, or SHNYR to his friends, lit a magical torch. "You're the lady from the stories," Slink said, eyeing her. "The one who married the ice block." "Where are you taking me?" "To the boss. He knows everything. If you want to find someone, you ask Scar." Boss Scar was a legend of the underworld, a crime lord who supposedly ran the city's black markets. Slink led her to a hidden underground cistern that had been converted into a lair. But the legend was currently lying on a table, his face gray, clutching a wound that oozed black smoke. "Dark magic," Beatrice noted, stepping forward. "A curse blade." The thugs surrounding the table drew their weapons. "Back off, lady." "I can save him," Beatrice said firmly. Scar opened one eye. "The Archmage's wife? Why would you help filth like me?" "Because I need information. And you need to not die." Scar grunted.
Deal.
Beatrice placed her hands on the wound. This wasn't like healing Caleb. This was fighting a curse. She closed her eyes and visualized Adrian's light, the cold, purifying starlight of his magic. She channeled it, pouring every ounce of her will into the wound. The black smoke hissed and evaporated. Scar gasped, color returning to his cheeks. He sat up, wincing. "You've got guts."
All right.
"What do you want?" "My husband. And his family." Scar's expression darkened. "Bad news, lady. The brother, Felix? His house was hit first. His wife, Mira, she didn't make it. The rebels killed her." Beatrice covered her mouth, tears stinging her eyes. Sweet, smiling Mira. "But the kids," Scar continued. "Tim and Hannah. My boys found them hiding in a pantry. We bought them off the looters. They're safe in the back room. Thank God. And Adrian." Scar hesitated. "He's alive. Him and Prince Gustav. But they're in the Tower of Sorrow. General Thunder plans to execute them at dawn. A public beheading to end the monarchy." The Tower of Sorrow was a fortress within a fortress, designed to hold rogue mages. It was impenetrable. "I need to get them out," Beatrice said.
Impossible, Scar scoffed.
"The place is locked down with anti-magic fields. And guarded by Thunder's elites." "I have to try." Beatrice looked Scar in the eye. "If you help me get inside, if we fail, if Adrian dies, I will pledge my service to you. A trained sorceress in your debt." Scar raised an eyebrow. "That was a prize worth a kingdom." "You're serious?"
Deadly.
"All right. We can't blast in. We have to sneak in." He looked at her torn dress. "And I have just the costume. We robbed a supply wagon from the convent yesterday." An hour later, Beatrice stood before the gates of the Tower of Sorrow dressed in a nun's habit. It was the ultimate irony. "Halt!" a rebel guard shouted. "No entry." Beatrice reached into her robes and pulled out the heavy iron amulet General Thunder had given her in Stonebridge. She held it up. "General Thunder sent me. Last rites for the prisoners." The guard looked at the amulet, the general's personal sigil. He paled and stepped aside. "Go on. Make it quick." She walked through the courtyard, her heart hammering. The anti-magic field pressed against her skin like lead, dampening her power. She couldn't blast her way out. She had to be smart. She found the dungeon level. 2 guards stood by the heavy oak door. "Blessings of the shadows," she murmured, approaching them. As they bowed their heads, she pulled 2 heavy brass candlesticks from her sleeves and struck them both simultaneously on the temples. They dropped like sacks of flour. She grabbed the keys and threw the door open. Adrian was chained to the wall, his face bruised, his lips split. Prince Gustav sat beside him, looking hopeless. "Sister?" Adrian squinted in the dim light. Beatrice threw back her hood. "Not exactly, Beatrice." Adrian lunged against his chains. "Are you insane?" How did you? Shut up and let me work. She fumbled with the keys, unlocking the manacles. As soon as the iron cuffs clicked open, she felt Adrian's magic rush back into him, a flood of cold power. We have to go.
Now.
They grabbed the prince and ran. But the alarm had been raised. Sirens wailed throughout the tower. They fought their way to the lower levels, Adrian blasting rebels with telekinetic waves while Beatrice shielded them. They reached the underground grotto the secret exit Scar had told her about. A boat waited, but standing on the dock was General Thunder. And behind him, a dozen archers. I gave you that amulet for luck, Thunder boomed, hefting his hammer. Not for treachery. Let them go, Beatrice said, stepping in front of Adrian. Your quarrel is with the crown, not with us. He is the Archmage. He is the crown's fist. Thunder raised his hammer. Fire. The archers drew back their strings. Suddenly, a blast of necrotic green fire erupted from the side, knocking the archers off their feet. Caleb stepped out from the shadows, his hands smoking. Caleb, Thunder roared. What are you doing? She saved the orphans, Caleb shouted, tears streaming down his face. He looked at Beatrice. I told you, Bea, you'd be mine. But not like this. I won't let you die. He turned to Thunder, raising a wall of bone and spirit to block the general's path.
Go.
Open a portal. The anti-magic field is weak here. Adrian yelled. Beatrice, do it. Beatrice focused, tearing a rift in the air. Come on. The prince first. Adrian shoved Gustav through. Then he turned to Beatrice. Go, Beatrice. Not without you. The bone wall shattered under Thunder's hammer. Caleb fell, motionless. Thunder charged. I have to hold him back. Adrian shouted. He grabbed Beatrice's waist and kissed her, desperate and fierce. I love you. Now go. He used a pulse of wind to shove her backward, straight into the swirling vortex. Adrian. The last thing she saw before the portal closed was her husband summoning a blade of pure ice to meet the falling hammer of the general. Beatrice was spat out onto the muddy bank of the river, miles downstream in the city slums. She screamed, clawing at the empty air where the portal had been. Lady! Slink appeared from the shadows, pulling her up. We gotta move. The tower is going up. A massive explosion rocked the city. The top of the Tower of Sorrow collapsed in a cloud of dust. Beatrice sank to her knees. He's gone. We have the kids, Slink urged, pulling her arm. Tim and Hannah. They're waiting by the boat. We have to leave. Numb with grief, Beatrice let herself be led. They found the boat. Tim and Hannah, traumatized and silent, clung to her as they pushed off into the dark river. Beatrice looked back at the burning capital, her heart a crater. The journey to Windy Peak was a blur of misery. They walked for days, avoiding the main roads. Beatrice's feet bled. She used her magic to warm the children at night, telling them stories of their Uncle Adrian, refusing to use the past tense. They reached the estate a week later. It was cold and empty. The servants had fled. We're safe here, she told the children, tucking them into the dusty beds. But peace was a lie. Hannah fell ill the next day, burning with a fever brought on by stress and exposure. Beatrice sat by her bedside for 3 days, cooling her forehead, pouring her own strength into the little girl. She was exhausted, her magic nearly depleted, when the heavy thud of boots sounded in the courtyard. She went to the window. Below, General Thunder stood with a platoon of soldiers. He looked battered, his armor scorched, but he was alive. Lady Blackwood, he bellowed. Bring out the spawn of Felix. The line must be ended. Over my dead body, Beatrice screamed. She ran down to the courtyard, drawing on the ley line beneath the house. She raised a shield around the manor. Thunder smashed his hammer against it.
Boom. Boom.
The shield flickered. She was too weak. Give them up. Thunder roared. Your husband is dead. There is no one coming. The shield shattered. Beatrice was thrown back against the stone steps. Thunder marched toward her, raising his hammer for the killing blow. Beatrice looked up, defiant to the end. Do it. but know that you will never know peace." Thunder grunted and swung. Crack. A bolt of lightning, white and blinding, struck the hammer, vaporizing the metal head instantly. Thunder stumbled back, staring at the melted handle. The air pressure dropped. The scent of ozone filled the courtyard. A portal, stable and majestic, opened at the gate. Stepping out was Adrian. He looked terrible. His robes were in tatters, he was covered in bandages, and he walked with a limp. But his eyes were burning with cold, divine fury. "You," Adrian said, his voice quiet and terrifying. "You touched my wife."
Impossible, Thunder gasped.
"I saw the tower fall on you. I am the Archmage," Adrian snarled. He raised a hand. "And you are trespassing." A torrent of lightning erupted from his fingertips. It wasn't a battle, it was an execution. Thunder and his men were blasted backward, their weapons turning to slag, their will broken. They fled, scrambling over each other to escape the wrath of the Blackwood. Adrian didn't pursue. He turned to Beatrice. The terrifying power faded, leaving just a man, tired, hurt, and relieved. "Adrian!" She ran to him. He caught her, wincing, and they collapsed together onto the flagstones. "I thought you were dead," she sobbed into his chest. "Prince Gustav, drag me into a stasis panic room," Adrian rasped, stroking her hair. "Dug ourselves out. The prince is crowned. The rebellion is crushed. General Vance's army arrived an hour ago." He pulled back to look at her face. "But I didn't care about any of that. I had to get to you. Tim and Hannah, they're upstairs. We will raise them," Adrian promised, "as our own." As they sat there, the first drops of rain began to fall from the gray sky. It wasn't a storm, it was a gentle, cleansing rain, washing away the dust of the road and the blood of the war. It washed over the roof of Windy Peak, marking the end of the long drought. Epilogue. 2 years later. The garden at Castle Blackcliff was in full bloom, a riot of roses and magical lilies that sang when the wind blew. "Beatrice, look out." Beatrice ducked just as a toy dragon, enchanted to fly, zoomed over her head. It was chased by a laughing Hannah, now a healthy, vibrant girl, and Tim, who was growing as tall as his uncle. Trailing behind them was a third child, a scruffy boy with a penchant for sneaking, whom they had legally adopted.